Not only have we introduced something that actually deteriorated performance, but we're not even aware. Your organization will make changes. Sometimes that might be reactive to something. Changes in technology, changes in professional standards. So you have to react to those changes appropriately. But sometimes those changes can also be proactive, where you're initiating the changes. You might be intentionally upgrading your equipment to something you think will work better. You might be changing protocols in hopes that a different drug process or procedure may result in some sort of a beneficial change. So there's a number of different circumstances of why the organization may change. So let's think about a couple examples. Let's suppose you're going to be changing EPCR software. That's an expensive process, both in terms of direct costs and indirect costs with having to train people on the new platform, both at the field level and from a back office perspective. So you've got to be thinking, what benefits is your organization going to be getting out of this change in EPCR software? Perhaps it's things like faster billing cycle times or fewer errors in billing information that result in delayed payment of claims. Perhaps it's more accurate charting, better clinical information, so that ultimately it leads to perhaps better patient outcomes or some particular process that's associated with better outcomes. But you've got to think, okay, can I actually measure to see whether or not those expected benefits are actually happening? Are you actually getting that return on investment of time, energy, and resources and hassle to get what you're looking for? So you're going to have to try to measure how well those processes are working before you make the change, so that after you make the change, you can look at it and see whether or not you're actually getting the benefits you were looking for. The other thing you may want to consider is not implementing the change throughout the entire organization. Now, sometimes that's just not possible. You're going to change your billing process. You're probably going to change a billing process for the whole organization. But sometimes the change might be possible to make with a smaller group, where you can try things out, work out the details, work out any problems before rolling it out to the entire organization. So let's think about that with another example. So let's suppose you're going to introduce a clinical equipment change. Perhaps you're going to be going from all manual CPR and introducing mechanical CPR, or maybe one of the other potential technologies to improve blood flow. You want to think about what are the benefits that you're expecting to see as a result of making that transition over to the mechanical CPR technology or the blood flow augmentation technology. That might be along the lines of better compression fractions, better compression rate compliance, as well ultimately as survival to hospital discharge. But regardless, you're going to want to be looking at how well that particular process is working before you introduce the change. So before you brought in that technology, what were your compression fractions? How well were you complying with compression rates? And what was your survival rate? So we may want to introduce the change just to a smaller part of the organization. You'll go ahead and introduce the change to that particular group and then see how it works out. Then take a look at the data coming out of that pilot testing to compare what the performance of those key processes were before the change was introduced and then after the change was introduced. Now, that might turn out a couple different ways. You might find that the performance of those processes that we're concerned about actually got better. We've got better chest compression fractions. We've got better compliance to our target rate range, perhaps between 100 and 120 per minute. We might have better ROS rates. We might have better survival to hospital discharge rates. So that's terrific. You implemented a change that seems to have resulted in an improvement. You've done that for a reasonable period of time. So it seems like it's a sustained change. And so that can be the signal to roll that out to the rest of the organization. Your pilot implementation was successful, and now you want to cause that change to happen throughout the rest of the organization. And with the benefit of the implementation experience you had with that pilot group. But change doesn't always result in improvement, unfortunately. And that's where the caution and the danger is. You might find that you didn't really move the needle much at all. Things stayed pretty much the same, comparing what things were like before you introduced the change with what happened after you introduced the change. And that may be the time to consider tweaking or adjusting the process to see if you can refine that a little bit, and maybe then provoke a positive change in those particular processes. But there's another outcome that's possible as well, and that's where the performance of your processes actually got worse after the implementation of the change. Maybe you're seeing that the compression fractions aren't as good as they were before. Rate compliance got worse. Maybe you're not getting as good of a ROS rate or survival to hospital discharge rate after you implemented the change. So you need to be prepared for that contingency as well. And in that sort of scenario, luckily it's been limited to the pilot group. It hasn't affected the entire organization. So it creates an opportunity for you to make a very cautious adjustment in the processes in hopes of correcting things. If your implementation was sound of the changes you expected, and despite your best efforts, things got worse, it may be time to reverse course, back things up, and not implement that particular change. And I've seen that happen, for example, with the introduction of mechanical CPR. Things actually got a little bit worse because the compression fractions actually went down because crews were taking a whole lot more time than anticipated to get everything put in place. But, some of those issues are correctable. With a new technology, perhaps it just isn't going to work in your particular setting. But what I described is not even the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario in my mind is perhaps the most common scenario, and that's where organizations aren't doing appropriate measurement of their processes before and after they introduce a change. They'll just go ahead and buy and implement a new technology without measuring the performance of the processes that are impacted. So let's suppose we introduce mechanical CPR or one of those blood flow augmentation technologies without the benefits of appropriate measurement of those key parameters before and after the change was introduced. We might have a situation where performance has actually deteriorated. Commonly, you will see this again with actual declines in compression fractions or longer interruptions in CPR for the application of those technologies. And if we were never measuring those things before and afterwards, the dangerous scenario in my mind is that not only have we introduced something that actually deteriorated performance, but we're not even aware that it has deteriorated performance. And that, for me, from my perspective, is the worst case scenario. And if it's a financial or operational thing, that might just cost you money. But if it's a clinical process, it could actually have made things more dangerous for patients. You're blindsided by the impact of that change in your organization's processes. Unfortunately, I think that is an all too common scenario in our industry right now. So I hope these comments were helpful, gave you some food for thought. So think about that a bit while you finish up your coffee, and then go out and try something.